I waited at the bus stop in the pouring rain for hours just to see my best friend, but when she passed by with others, she didn't even look at me. I'm writing this at 3 a.m. because I can't sleep. Again. It's been 6 months since everything fell apart, and I still replay that moment when I saw her face in the bus window. Sarah, my best friend since middle school. The person I thought would be my maid of honor. The person whose I destroyed because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. Let me start from the beginning, because maybe if I write it all down, I'll finally understand how I became the villain in my own story. 3 years ago I was living what everyone called the perfect. Mark and I had been together since college, 8 years total. We had the apartment with exposed brick walls, the Sunday morning farmer's market routine, the shared Netflix account with perfectly synced viewing habits. He proposed on our anniversary at the same restaurant where we had our first date. I said yes because of course I said yes. Mark was stability. Mark was safe. Mark was predictable. That should have been enough. Sarah was there through everything. She helped me pick out the ring when Mark was being obvious about shopping. She drove me to dress appointments and pretended to care about the difference between ivory and champagne. She listened to me stress about centerpieces and seating charts. She was the friend who shone with ice cream when I had panic about becoming a wife at 26. But Sarah was also the one who introduced me to Ryan. It was at her birthday party last year. I remember the exact moment because it felt like a movie scene. No, when the music swells and everything else fades into background noise. Ryan walked into Sarah's apartment carrying this ridiculous elaborate cake he'd made himself, flour still somehow dusting his forearms, and when he smiled at me across the room, something in my chest just shifted. I told it was nothing. I was engaged, I was happy, I was building it with Mark. But then Ryan started texting me. It began innocent enough. Sarah had given him my number because he was new in town and looking for restaurant recommendations. He'd moved here for work, something in graphic design, and didn't know anyone except Sarah from some online gaming community they were part of. The texts were casual at first. Sarah said no, the best Thai place. Then they became more frequent. Longer. He'd send me pictures of his attempts at cooking. I'd respond with photos of my own kitchen disasters. We bonded over shared Netflix obsessions and terrible jokes. Mark noticed me smiling at my phone more often, but I brushed it off. Just Sarah being Sarah, I'd say. Which wasn't technically a lie. Sarah was the connection. Sarah was how this whole thing started. The emotional cheating crept in so gradually I almost didn't recognize it was happening. Ryan would text me good morning before Mark was even awake. He'd ask about my day, actually listen to my responses, remember details Mark had forgotten. When I complained about my job, Ryan offered genuine advice instead of Mark's standard, "That sucks," response. I started looking forward to Ryan's messages more than conversations with my fiancée. I started sharing things with Ryan that I wasn't sharing with Mark. I started lying about who I was texting. The first time we met alone I convinced it was innocent. We were both free on a Tuesday afternoon, and he wanted to check out this coffee shop I'd recommended, just as friends. I told, I'm helping Sarah's friend adjust to the city. But I changed my outfit 3 times before leaving the house. I spent an hour getting ready for coffee with another man, and I didn't tell my fiancée where I was going. Ryan was everything Mark wasn't. Where Mark was methodical and planned every detail of our future, Ryan was spontaneous. Where Mark talked about 401ks and mortgage rates, Ryan discussed art and travel and dreams that didn't fit into spreadsheets. We talked for 4 hours that day. 4 hours that felt like minutes. I went home and lied to Mark about where I'd been. Shopping with Sarah. I said even though I came home empty-handed. The coffee dates became a weekly thing. Then twice a week, Ryan would text, same place, same time. And I'd find excuses to be available. I started scheduling my around these meetings. Sarah knew we were out. I made sure to mention it casually. Oh, Ryan and I grabbed coffee yesterday. Because as long as she knew, it couldn't be that wrong, right? She seemed happy that her 2 friends were getting along. She'd even suggest group activities sometimes. But somehow it always ended being just Ryan and me. I should have seen the red flags. I should have stopped when I realized I was deleting text threads. I should have been alarmed when I started comparing Mark unfavorably to Ryan in my head. Instead, I started planning my days around seeing Ryan's name on my phone screen. The emotional affair lasted 8 months before it became physical. 8 months of lies, deleted messages and elaborate cover stories. 8 months of falling for someone who wasn't my fiancé while pretending everything was fine at home. Mark started asking questions around month 6. Seemed distracted lately. Or always on phone. When did start caring so much about appearance for random errands? I gassed him. I turned his valid concerns into character flaws. Or being insecure. I'd say. Don't trust me. The manipulation was so smooth I almost believed my own lies. But Sarah started asking different questions. And Ryan seemed to be spending a lot of time together lately. Are sure Mark's okay with all these coffee dates? I feel weird that 2 out more than I do now. I dismissed her concerns too. I accused her of being jealous. I suggested maybe she had feelings for Ryan herself and was projecting onto me. I watched my best friend's face crumble when I implied she was being a bad friend by questioning my judgment. The first time Ryan and me was on a Thursday in October. We were walking through the park after another innocent coffee date, and he stopped suddenly, turned to me and said, I can't pretend this is just friendship anymore. I had 8.5 seconds to choose between the I'd built and the feeling I'd been chasing. I choose the feeling. When I got home that night, Mark had made dinner. He'd set the table with our good plates and lit candles. He was excited about some promotion opportunity at work and wanted to celebrate. He pulled out my chair, told me about his day with this genuine enthusiasm that made my stomach twist with guilt. I nodded and smiled and made appropriate responses while tasting absolutely nothing. The physical affair lasted 2 months. 2 months of elaborate lies, close calls, and the constant terror of getting caught mixed with the most intense feelings I'd ever experienced. I told I deserved happiness. I told Mark and I had grown apart. I told I'd figure out how to handle everything eventually. I told a lot of things that weren't true. But the worst lie I told was that no one was getting as long as no one knew. Sarah knew. Sarah had always known. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday in December. Sarah asked me to meet her at our usual spot, the coffee shop where Ryan and I had been meeting in secret for months. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. She'd found the text messages. Not between Ryan and me, we were too careful for that. She'd found messages between Ryan and some other friend of his, talking about the girl he was seeing, and how complicated it was because she was engaged. Sarah had put it together. Sarah had always been too smart for her own good. How long? She asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking around her coffee cup. I tried to lie. Even then, caught red-handed, I tried to minimize and deflect and make excuses. But Sarah knew me too well. She'd known me for 15 years. She could read every tell, every micro-expression, every defensive posture I unconsciously adopted. How long? She repeated. 10 months, I whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my best friend absorb the fact that I'd been lying to her face for almost a year. That I'd been betraying not just Mark but her trust too. That I'd been using her introduction as cover for an affair. Mark doesn't know, she said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. Going to tell him. I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. I'd been living day to day, crisis to crisis, lie to lie. I hadn't thought past the next secret meeting with Ryan. Sarah stood. She gathered her coat and purse with movements so precise and controlled I knew she was barely holding herself together. I can't be part of this anymore, she said. I can't watch destroy Mark. I can't watch destroy, and I can't pretend I don't know what we're doing. Sarah, please. I'm done, Emma. We're done. She left me sitting alone in that coffee shop, and I knew with absolute certainty that I'd just lost the most important friendship of mine. But I still didn't stop seeing Ryan. I told Sarah would come around. I told she was overreacting. I told I just needed more time to figure everything out. What I didn't know was that Sarah had already made her own decision about what came next, and what came next was the mode everything I thought I knew about consequences. Sarah told Mark 3 days later. I know the exact timeline because Mark confronted me on a Friday at 6:47 p.m. I remember checking the clock on the microwave when he walked into the kitchen, still in his work clothes holding his phone. We need to talk, he said, and something in his voice made my freeze. I knew. Before he said another word, before he showed me the screenshots Sarah had sent him, before he asked me to explain the unexplained absences and the lies and the months of looking him in the eye while living a double, I knew it was over. Is it true? He asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. I could have lied. I'd gotten so good at lying, but something about the way Mark was looking at me, not angry, just devastated, made all my carefully constructed defenses crumble. Yes, I whispered. The sound that came out of Mark was something I'd never heard before. Not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, just this broken noise that I knew would haunt me forever. He didn't yell, he didn't throw things, he didn't demand details or explanations. He just stood there for what felt like hours, staring at me like he was trying to reconcile the person he'd loved for 8 years with the stranger who'd been betraying him for 10 months. I trusted, he finally said. Trusted completely. That was somehow worse than screaming would have been. Mark moved out the next day. He took his clothes, his books, his collection of vintage concert posters, and the coffee maker we'd bought together on our 3rd anniversary. He left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter with no note, no explanation, no final words. Just silence. I called Sarah 17 times that first week, she never answered. I texted novels worth of apologies and explanations and desperate pleas for forgiveness. She read every message, I could see the read receipts, but never responded. On day 8, she blocked my number. Ryan and I tried to make it work. That's the most pathetic part of this whole story. After burning down 2 most important relationships in I convinced it had to be worth something. Ryan and I had to be some epic love story that justified the destruction. We weren't. Without the secrecy, without the stolen moments and forbidden excitement, what Ryan and I had was ordinary. He was charming and spontaneous, yes, but he was also unreliable and selfish in ways I'd overlooked when I was high on the thrill of the affair. He'd cancel plans last minute. He'd disappear for days without explanation. He'd get moody when I cried about Mark or Sarah, like my grief over losing them was somehow insulting to what we had. Chose this, he'd say when I got emotional. Chose me. But I was starting to realize I hadn't chosen anything. I just destroyed everything I had for the illusion of something better. The relationship lasted 6 weeks after Mark moved out. Ryan ended it via text message. This is too complicated, he wrote. I think we both need space to figure things out. I stared at that message for hours, trying to process the fact that the person I depended my entire for was dumping me with the emotional maturity of a teenager. I tried to get Mark back. I know how that sounds. I know how selfish and delusional it was. But desperation makes, and I was drowning in the consequences of my choices. I showed at his new apartment 11 p.m. on a Tuesday and sobbing, begging him to give me another chance. I promised I'd changed. I promised it would never happen again. I promised I'd do anything to fix what I'd broken. Mark opened the door, took one look at me, and his expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been pity. Emma, he said quietly, need to leave. Please, I begged. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry, love. No, he said. Don't get to do this. Don't get to destroy everything and then show here expecting me to put back together. He was right, but being right didn't make it less. I know I messed. I tried again. But we had 8 years together. That has to mean something. It did mean something. Mark said. Until decided it didn't. He closed the door. I sat in my car outside his building for 2 hours, crying until I couldn't breathe properly, hoping he might change his mind and come outside. He didn't. That's when the real isolation started. Mark and I had shared friend groups. When word got out about the affair, and it got out fast because Sarah made sure people knew the truth, I found systematically excluded from everything. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to. Group chats I was quietly removed from. Social media posts from events where I could see all our mutual friends having fun without me. Nobody was openly hostile, they just forgot I existed. I tried reaching out to a few people individually, but the responses were always the same polite but distant variations of I'm really busy right now, and maybe some other time. Jessica, who I'd considered one of my closest friends after Sarah, was brutally honest when I finally cornered her at the grocery store. I can't trust, she said simply. I could lie to Mark for 10 months, if could betray Sarah like that, how do I know wouldn't do the same to me? That's different. I protested. Not my boyfriend. I would never. Jessica interrupted. Destroyed two of the most important relationships and for some guy barely knew. That's not different, that's who are. I wanted to argue but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down I was starting to wonder if she was right. Work became unbearable. Mark and I worked for companies in the same industry, so professional circles overlapped. People knew. People talked. I'd walk into networking events and feel the conversation stop. I'd see former colleagues whisper and look away when I tried to make eye contact. I wasn't technically doing anything wrong at work, but I could feel my reputation disintegrating. My boss started giving me smaller projects. I stopped getting invited to client dinners. My work reviews went from glowing to satisfactory with room for improvement. The professional isolation was almost worse than the personal stuff because at least with friends, I could tell they were being judgmental. But work was supposed to be about competence, not personal drama. Except when proven can maintain elaborate lies for months, people start questioning integrity in all areas. 6 months after everything fell apart, I was essentially living like a ghost in my own. I'd go days without talking another human being beyond necessary work interactions and small talk with cashiers. I'd see Sarah sometimes around town. Our city wasn't that big, and we'd shopped at the same grocery store for years. The first few times, I tried to approach her. She'd see me coming and immediately turn around or duck into another aisle. By the fourth or fifth encounter I stopped trying. I'd just stand there and watch my former best friend actively avoid me like I was contagious. The worst part was seeing her with her new group of friends. Sarah had always been social but she'd found a whole new circle of people I didn't recognize. She looked happy. She looked like she was thriving. She looked like someone who'd successfully removed a person from her and was better off for it. That's when I started spending hours on social media, torturing with updates from I'd been excluded from. Mark had photos from group trips I used to be part of. Sarah had pictures from parties where she was laughing with people who'd replaced me. Everyone was moving on. Everyone was fine. Everyone except me. I started having panic at random times. In the grocery store checkout line during work meetings. While brushing my teeth. These overwhelming waves of realization that I destroyed my entire support system for absolutely nothing. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m. making mental lists of every relationship I'd damaged, every person every lie I'd told. The inventory of my failures grew longer every night. But the moment that broke me completely happened on a Thursday in March. I was walking home from work when I saw the bus pulling to the stop across the street. For some reason, maybe loneliness, maybe desperation, maybe just muscle memory from better times, I looked toward the windows. Sarah was sitting in the third row surrounded by 3 people I didn't recognize. They were all laughing at something someone had said. Sarah looked genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in months before everything fell apart. She glanced out the window as the bus pulled away, and for just a second our eyes met. I raised my hand in a tentative wave, hoping for some sign that maybe enough time had passed, maybe she'd soften toward me, maybe we could start to rebuild what I'd destroyed. Sarah looked right through me like I wasn't there. Like I'd never existed at all. The bus drove away, and I stood there on the sidewalk, realizing that I'd become invisible to the person who'd known me better than anyone else in the world. That night, I finally understood that some damage can't be undone, some relationships can't be repaired, and some choices create consequences that follow forever. But I still hadn't learned the most important lesson yet. The final lesson came 18 months later, at Mark's wedding. I didn't attend obviously, but social media exists and mutual acquaintances exist, and in a city this size news travels fast. Mark married someone named Claire. They'd met through work 6 months after our engagement ended. The wedding photos showed everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, where former colleagues were congratulating him on his new chapter. She was everything I wasn't. Brunette where I was blonde. Quiet where I was loud. Stable where I'd been, well, me. But that's not the part that destroyed me. The part that destroyed me was seeing Sarah in the wedding photos. She was the maid of honor. Not just a bridesmaid. The maid of honor. The position she was supposed to hold at my wedding. The role I'd fantasized about her playing in my for 15 years of friendship. Instead, she was standing next to Mark's new wife, holding her bouquet, smiling like she belonged there. Like she'd found her place in his after I'd vacated it. The worst part was how natural it looked. Sarah and Claire, laughing together and getting ready photos. Sarah giving a speech at the reception that someone had recorded and posted online. Sarah dancing with Mark during the maid of honor dance, both of them looking genuinely happy. I watched those videos alone in my apartment at 2 a.m., crying until I couldn't breathe, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd lost. I hadn't just lost Mark. I hadn't just lost Sarah. I'd lost the future that should have been ours. Sarah should have been my maid of honor. She should have held my bouquet and given speeches about our friendship and danced with my husband. Instead, she was doing all of those things for the woman who'd taken my place. The woman who'd gotten that I'd thrown away. By then I'd been in therapy for 8 months. Dr. Martinez was patient and kind and probably tired of hearing me circle back to the same themes every session. I just don't understand how Sarah could replace me so easily. I said for the 100th time, Dr. Martinez said gently. Sarah didn't replace. Abandoned position in her. She found someone worthy of that trust. But we were best friends for 15 years. And spent the last year of that friendship lying to her face while using her introduction to have an affair. The truth was always so simple when someone else said it out loud. Do you think she ever thinks about me? I asked. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Does it matter? It did matter. It mattered desperately. Because if Sarah never thought about me, if I'd been completely erased from her memory, then what did those 15 years of friendship mean? What did any of it mean? But I was starting to understand that meaning isn't something get to assign retroactively. Don't get to cheat and lie and betray someone and then demand that they remember the good times. 3 months after Mark's wedding, I ran into Ryan at a coffee shop. Not our coffee shop. I'd stopped going there after Sarah confronted me. This was a new place across town where I'd been trying to rebuild some kind of normal routine. Ryan looked good. Tanned, like he'd been traveling. Confident, like someone who'd moved on completely from the chaos we'd created together. Emma, he said, seeming genuinely surprised to see me. How are? The question was so casual, so normal, like we were acquaintances catching instead of two people who'd destroyed multiple lives together. I've been better, I said honestly. I heard about Mark getting married. Ryan said. That must have been hard to him. This person I depended my entire for was making small talk about my ex-fiance's wedding like we were discussing the weather. It was, I said. Well, Ryan said, glancing at his watch. It was good seeing. I'm actually running late for a meeting. He left, just like that. No acknowledgement of what we'd been to each other. No recognition of the damage we'd caused. No understanding that his casual dismissal was just another reminder of how little any of it had mattered to him. I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours afterward, finally grasping the full absurdity of what I'd done. I destroyed an 8-year relationship and a 15-year friendship for someone who couldn't spare 5 minutes for a real conversation 18 months later. I traded everything I had for someone who treated our entire affair like a temporary distraction. That's when I started writing this. Not for absolution. Not for sympathy, but because I needed to document the real cost of what I'd done. The loneliness is the worst part. Not the dramatic, cinematic loneliness seen in movies. Just the daily grinding isolation of having burned every bridge spent decades building. I eat dinner alone every night. I haven't had a real conversation with a friend in over a year. I spend weekends cleaning my apartment and watching Netflix shows I don't care about just to fill the silence. I tried dating apps, but it's hard to explain why someone with no close friends, no social circle, and trust issues probably isn't relationship material. Most guys stop texting after the second date when they realize I have no one to introduce them to, no group activities to invite them to, no references for my character beyond my own word. And why would they trust my word? I don't even trust my own word anymore. I changed jobs twice because the professional isolation became unbearable. Each time I told I'd start fresh, make new friends, build better relationships. But patterns follow. When proven capable of elaborate deception, people keep an arm's length even when trying to be honest. My new colleagues are polite but distant. I'm competent at my work, but I'm not invited to happy hours or office birthday parties. I exist in a professional bubble where I complete tasks and attend meetings and go home to my empty apartment. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just talked to Mark about feeling restless in our relationship. If I'd gone to couples therapy instead of into Ryan's arms. If I'd been honest about my doubts instead of building a fantasy in secret. But I know the answer. Mark deserves someone who would choose him every day, not someone who had the urge to look for something better. Claire chooses him every day. That's why they work. Sarah deserved a friend who wouldn't betray her trust for a temporary feeling. Claire is probably that friend now. That's why they work too. I scroll through social media sometimes, torturing with updates from the I could have had. Mark and Claire bought a house. Sarah got promoted at work. They go to dinner parties together. They take group vacations. They have the kind of stable, trustworthy relationships I convinced were boring. They look happy. Not frantically, desperately happy like I was during the affair. Just content. Secure. Like people who know their friends won't betray them and their partners won't cheat on them. Like people who've never had their entire world pulled out from under them by someone they trusted completely. Last month I saw them at the farmer's market. Mark, Claire, Sarah and Sarah's boyfriend, someone I didn't recognize but who looked at her the way Mark used to look at me. They were buying flowers and sampling cheese and laughing at inside jokes I'd never be part of. I hid behind a produce stand and watched them for 20 minutes, memorizing the way they interacted. The casual touches, the easy conversation. The complete absence of drama or secrets or lies. They looked like a family. Not family but chosen family. The kind of people who show for each other during hard times and celebrate each other during good ones. The kind of family I used to have. The kind of family I away for someone who couldn't even remember my middle name. When I got home that day I looked in the mirror, and tried to see what Mark had seen when he fell in love with me. What Sarah had seen when she chose me as her best friend. What Ryan had seen when he decided I was worth pursuing. All I saw was a woman who'd everything and lost it all because she convinced herself she deserved more than she had. Dr. Martinez says healing is possible. She says I can build new relationships, learn to trust again, create a different kind of. She's probably right. People recover from worse mistakes. But recovery and consequence are different things. I can heal, but Mark will never trust me again. Sarah will never call me when she needs someone to talk to. The 15 years of friendship and 8 years of love I destroyed don't get restored just because I've learned my lesson. Some prices are permanent. Some choices echo forever. Some bridges, once burned, leave stranded on the wrong side of everything used to call home. I'm writing this as a warning. Not because I think I can save anyone else from making similar mistakes, but because I need to understand something I didn't understand when I was making choices that felt exciting and secret and justified. When cheat, don't just betray partner. Betray every single person who trusted. Betray friends who vouched for character. Betray family members who believed in relationship. Betray every person who looked at and thought, there's someone I can count on. Become someone who can't be trusted, and that reputation follows everywhere. The affair lasted 10 months, the consequences will last the rest of my. The excitement was temporary but the emptiness is permanent.